2020 at the Ladybank Rooftop. Today's theme, which you're probably aware, is Break the Bias. We have so much to unpack, and I do also want to address those who are joining us via social media, our audience at home, probably in Ugg boots, trying to stay away from the wet weather. Not a bad choice. Before I introduce our wonderful panellists, I do want to acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land on which we meet. And then I will also do a little bit of housekeeping, explain the format, and then we will get away. So to begin with, some housekeeping. This is always the awkward part of the discussion because I usually give people direction to make sure that your phone is on mute, but almost every time somebody's mum calls. So if we can have our phones on silent. This is also the time where I will direct you or point to the toilets, but I figure if at this stage in your life you can't figure that out, there might be something else going on. But for those who haven't figured out, the toilets are back there. Very snazzy toilets indeed.
They are.
Yeah, they're really great. Very good toilets, worthwhile checking out while you're here. So yes, we will chat for 30 minutes. And then we will take audience. So for those watching from home or from social media, at work, not doing your job, that's fine. We encourage that. You can send through some questions and we'll get to those at the end. A little bit about me, very, very briefly. I try and keep it the length of a tweet because that seems to be where you can solve, on Twitter, you can solve all of the world's problems in 240 characters. So I am a mother, I'm a journalist, I'm an author of a book that will be published in a few weeks by Penguin, How to Lose Friends and Influence White People. I'm the co-founder of Media Diversity Australia, an organisation that tries to improve and increase cultural diversity in news and current affairs media. I'm a mental health ambassador, a television and podcast host, and I'm a horrible reverse parker, where anybody downstairs would have noticed earlier today. To our wonderful panellists, Madison is an Australian Paralympic athlete, wheelchair racer who specialises in middle and long distance events and is also a world record holder. She's now widely regarded as one of the greatest Australian athletes of all time. She competed at the 2008 Beijing, 2012 London, 2016 Rio and 2020 Tokyo Summer Paralympics, winning 2 gold medals, 3 silver and a bronze. Did I miss any?
I don't think so.
We got them all? Great. She's also won 10 medals and also competed and cleaned up at the World Para-Athletics Championships. I think this is the appropriate time to probably share that I only ever got the green participation ribbons at our sport carnivals at school. So I'm incredibly in awe of somebody of your accomplishment. It's absolutely incredible. Wendy is up next. Wendy El-Khoury is the founder and director of one of Australia's most popular wedding and event marketplaces, Wedded Wonderland. She's a digital and social media keynote speaker and a mentor with a massive social following. Also an advocate for refugees and small business owners. When she's not doing that, she's busy fundraising for things like bushfire relief and other charitable appeals, probably adding flood to your list. She's also a mother of 5 and came to Australia from war-torn Lebanon at the age of 3. Turns out you don't sleep. Is that your secret? Is that your secret power? Caroline Campbell has more than 25 years of executive level experience in the sports industry. She's the current chair of Sport New South Wales, recently Scouts New South Wales CEO. She's the former Netball New South Wales head, leading it for 15 years, and the Women's Hockey World Cup for 5 years. She was most recently interim CEO of Basketball Australia. Caroline, truly a trailblazing CEO. Thank you for joining us. And Claire. Claire is the CEO of Little Wings and has dedicated her career to the not-for-profit sector, most recently fulfilling roles as CEO in the anti-human trafficking and disability industries. Claire's a qualified psychologist, specialising in child and adolescent welfare and passionate about working in community-based projects aimed at making a difference in the lives of children and their families. And more recently, Claire authored a book titled Threads of Hope, and the goal of celebrating the lives of human trafficking survivor. Another amazing overachiever. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess to kick off, I wanted to dissect and have a chat about what break the bias means. And officially, this is what it means. And I wanted to see how this translates in the lives of the women who join me. Break the bias, a world free of bias, stereotypes and discrimination, a world that is diverse, equitable and inclusive. You know, it all sounds lovely, it sounds like a nice warm hug, but I want to talk about how that translates and what we need to do to actually achieve that, beyond the rhetoric and beyond something that just kind of looks good to share on Instagram for one day. So Madison, I'll start with you. So breaking the bias, or even equality for women, can mean different things for different women, because we all face different biases. And I know we had a chat the other day, it was something we were both really passionate about, that too often when it comes to International Women's Day, it's a very kind of narrow conversation for a very particular sort of woman. For some women though, there are multiple layers of hurdles. So what does break the bias mean for somebody like you?
For myself, it means rediscovering what your own identity is outside of the stigmas and the bias that have been put on us. And that's an incredibly challenging thing for any single person to do. And I think the minute you belong to any kind of minority group, that becomes your entire identity. And so working out who you are outside of that whilst you've grown up, internalizing that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges that any of us will have. And as women, we have all experienced this. The more layers that we do add to that, you know, myself, I'm a woman of colour with a disability, so there's quite a few layers of different identity there, and I never got to really lean into my identity as a woman or as a woman of colour, because disability was the umbrella that kind of encompassed every part of who I was for, you know, the entire time growing up. I have two sisters, we all look exactly the same, and the only difference is I'm in a chair, and they've been able to lean into different parts of their identity than I've ever been able to. And so for myself, one of the biggest challenges was unlearning everything that I had been, you know, taught and kind of just been soaking up my entire life to kind of, you know, work out who I am outside of that. And that's, I think, one of the most important things that any of us can do. And as women, it's so important is unlearning all those things that we have been taught and really leaning into who we are. And it's something that we need to do for ourselves, but it's also something that we need to create the space for the women around us to do. And I think, you know, for some of us, that there is privilege that comes with who we are. I know for myself, I'm a woman with a disability, and that's not always the most privileged position to hold, but I am a Paralympian, and I do have a louder voice, and I do get heard when I speak. And one of the responsibilities that comes with us, that we all have, is to hold space for the women beside us to be able to work at who they are and break that bias and understand who they are and not justify the space that they take up. So in terms of breaking the bias and leaning into your identity as you see it, not as other people define you, how do you describe who Madison is? I think you asked me this on the phone and I didn't have an answer for it. You know, I think it depends on what I'm doing and who I'm with and on what part of that I'm leaning into. You know, this week is obviously International Women's Week, and so, you know, I feel like that part of my identity is at the forefront, and that's what, you know, that's how I feel. And when I'm in this room with you guys, that's who I feel that I am. And then, you know, when I'm out there on the track, I feel like I'm an athlete, and that is, you know, every single part of who I am. And I think it's about embracing every single part of that on your terms. And it's allowed to be, you know, fluid and change, and it's about being authentic.
I'll bring you in, Carolyn, at this point. You've carved out a career in sport, historically a space that's been dominated by men. And why is it important to not just accept lazy excuses of this is just the way things were, this is the way things are, this is the way things have been?
I think for me, most importantly, it's about finding a path and then performing in that path that actually enables people to take it seriously. It's one thing to actually just say, this is not good enough, or this is how it shouldn't be. You've actually got to plot that out and strategise as to how you can change that by really performing and putting some actions to your words and understanding that. I think most definitely when I was CEO of Netball New South Wales, as an example, 100-odd sports, I think there was 3 or 4 female CEOs in the group at that time in that state sector. Also, it's about really being very encouraging and mentoring and nurturing people to know that there is a pathway and helping support them however that might look. So, yeah, just not accepting it. I mean, the government had to put out funding to renovate all the sporting facilities when they decided maybe girls and women wanted to play sport and there was only a male change room, or you had to walk through a male change room to get to the girls' toilets or whatever it might have been. I mean, these were obviously historically that's what's happened, and the numbers and the way that the market operates now is a very different one. So there's some really, I guess, satisfying moments for that. And I suppose my biggest joy I get is just watching athletes of all descriptions and genders and everything else. But when you see somebody that's come through a sport and chase down the adversity and making sure that pathway's there is absolutely, I just get that's probably the biggest joy I can get out of anything.
And if you were to summarise what Break the Bias means to you, how would you put it?
I want to see really open and transparent pathways and processes and systems that allow whoever they are to be the very best and to chase that down. Whether it's in sport or now in my role as Scouts New South Wales CEO, there's people there that want to pursue this. I was at a Scouts Awards on the weekend, listening to some of the achievements and the hikes and whatever these young ladies had taken on was absolutely phenomenal. I think anybody that wants to do whatever they want to do and be the best that they can be, as long as that is able to be achieved, then that's breaking that bias.
Wonderful. Claire, there's so much more work to be done, even though we have a lot to celebrate in terms of what has changed for women of our generation, but there's more work to be done to protect women and children in this country. I'm interested in what Break the Bias means to you, both in the work that you do, but also in your personal life. I know you raising two little boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think for me, breaking the bias just means that however you want to show up in the world, that you have the freedom to do that. The way you dress, the way you talk, the job you want to do. And probably for me personally, my whole career I've worked in the not-for-profit space, but until this role I always worked in a female-dominated industry. But today I find myself in aviation, which is only 5% are female. And it was really the first time that I had to change my approach. I had to think about what was unique about my style of management and to own that and stand by it and to ride the wave of challenge that came with that. But again, I dress how I dress, I talk how I talk, I trot around like a maniac. That's me, and that's okay. And sometimes that comes with a lot of criticism, that people think that, if you're more nurturing or you're more calm or you take a long time to make a decision, that you're weak or you're not ready to make that decision. But I think it's just the freedom to say, this is how I do it, and that's okay. And so for me, whenever I meet, particularly, in my work, I meet a lot of mothers from the bush, and they can have quite a low sense of self, that I'm just a mother, or I just work part-time, or I just do this. But it's actually saying to them, you're doing an amazing job, raising a family and keeping it together. And being a mum of little boys, one that just started school, anyone that has children, I do not know how you look normal with the school hours. It's hectic, and you're juggling lots of balls in the background. And I think as women, we maybe don't speak about that, and we just try and get on with the job, which is great on one side, but it also means when you're struggling that people don't really acknowledge that or make space for you. And so for me, breaking the bias is just that, is celebrating people wherever they are in the world, understanding that titles and things change, right? Just as you were saying, Madison.
And that we have more than one identity that we can lean into.
That's exactly right. Like when I'm at school, it doesn't matter that I'm a CEO, it doesn't matter that I'm a psychologist, I'm just Huxley's mum.
Yeah.
But when I'm at work, all those things matter, and I have to be tougher, and I have to make sure my point of view and my voice is a lot louder. So yeah, I think just understanding that that's harder or easier for different people, and making sure that we accommodate that as much as we can and be mindful.
Wonderful. So Wendy, I'm going to ask you what your take on this year's theme is, but also what it is that you do to live up to it.
Okay. I believe that there are so many layers to a person, and you don't realise what influences you until you're put in a position where you think, oh my goodness, I have to look out for this person, or I have to stand up for what I believe in. And my background being, from Lebanon, growing up in southwest Sydney, and working so many different jobs and trying so many different things, and being told when I entered into the media world that, you know, the Caucasian girl was always going to get the job before I was, and
I'm working to fix that.
yeah, thank you. But you know, all of these kinds of things that and obstacles that you find in your along your path, and you know, people think that, you know, having millions of followers online comes with a great big status and ego and expectation, and the other side of me being a mother of 5 children, really being concerned about small business, and particularly women who don't have access to the information and the resources that are required for them to succeed as much as they should in this country. It is a problem. There is a problem with, I believe, particular migrant groups who, you know, during COVID and during the lockdowns and during the whole LGA situation were not supported or were not given enough information and advice to, again, gain access. I feel like women right now, I look outside and I see floods, and the first thing I think of is there's probably a single mother out there who's trying to figure out how to get her child to school, how to get to work, and your mind just doesn't stop racing about all of the people who need assistance, and then how you can, I guess, figure that out and work out whether it is a biased scenario or whether it is as a result of how our society has worked up until now, and how can we make a difference moving forward. You know, how can we pull these kind of groups of different things that keep happening time and time again? We have to learn at some point that there needs to be a fundamental foundation for women in this country, and there needs to be a foundation for all minorities in this country, and there needs to be a foundation for anyone who wants to be able to access information and wants to be able to move forward. And unless we work together to be able to resolve these, you know, what people refer as one-offs and scenarios, they're not. These are, we keep finding ourselves in situations where there are women and there are people in general who need assistance, need advice, need support, and we can do better collectively once we recognise that as a macro problem and work together to move forward. So the bias is ingrained. And it is something that often is treated as random. In media, we see, you know, the amount of news that we consume on a daily basis and the amount of scenarios that we have to see different people in and think, oh my goodness, this is all too much. But once you actually start to figure out where the problem lies and how we can resolve it, we can actually resolve it, and we need to work together to do that.
Well, being the enormous, wonderful overachiever you are, you answered my next question.
Okay.
So I'm going to, you talk about access to information, and it's something I actually witnessed during COVID. You used your personal accounts and your platform to break down what was happening and the impact on small businesses. Why did you feel that, you know, why did you feel compelled to do that?
Because no one else was doing it. And I, homeschooling with 5 children, and I was pregnant during COVID, I knew how limited my time was, but all of that time and all of that energy had to go into helping out these poor business owners who could not find the information because there were so many layers on websites. A lot of it was not translated. A lot of it was simply not being shared quickly enough in terms of the grants, in terms of the information that businesses needed to understand, can I actually open today? Can I bring my staff in? Am I going to get in trouble for doing this? And people were receiving fines in our community for not understanding what the rules were. And that really, really upset me, because these small business owners who put everything into their business all of a sudden are receiving fines just trying to keep their staff hired and trying to put food on the table. It just wasn't good enough. So, you know, I had to share and do what I had to do, and a lot of people were saying, oh my goodness, like, this is, you know, this is insane, the amount of information and things that you're finding. But behind the scenes, there were a lot of people in my DMs sending me this information and helping me get it out there. It wasn't just me on my own. And a lot of them were women, because they could see that I was trying to assist and they wanted to help me help others. And that's what it takes. You know, it was definitely not just me, but you have to use your platform for good. I've been given a huge responsibility through the following that I have. And, you know, I talk about weddings. I work in the wedding industry. Yeah. This is meant to be about love, you know, and having to flip all of that.
Well, weddings were on hold for a while.
Weddings were on hold for quite a while. Obviously, my business was impacted. But during that time, it was fight, and we had to fight for each other.
Well, it's obvious, to me, and I think to anybody who sees the incredible work you do, that small business and empowering women really puts a fire in your belly. And Madison, I'm going to go back to the conversation we had. We had a really lovely chat last week. And one of the things you talked about that you were really passionate about was in regards to employment, but it wasn't necessarily CEO access and boardrooms. Talk to me about what you're passionate about.
When we look at, I think, intersectionality is so important in this conversation. When we talk about employment for women, we're talking about we need to put women in more decision-making roles, in higher roles, to be able to have a greater impact on not just communities, but economy and everything. And the reality is when we look at disability in that space, we're just asking to be let through the front door. We're not even in positions to demand more in the workforce because we're not even in it. We're among the most underemployed minorities that there are. And when we look at the people with disabilities that we do know, we're all athletes. It's just a bunch of Paralympians that have been seen on screens that are then just put into different roles after they retire. And for some of us, while we're still racing, we're not hearing other voices. We're just hearing the most physically able version of disability, saying our bit. And there is so much more that we're not seeing. So when we talk about employment, we're just asking to be let through the door. To add to that, we're also not seeing anyone in roles. When we know somebody with a disability who is employed, we're seeing so many people employed within the NDIS, not in decision-making roles, but we decided this person has a disability, so we'll put them into this big disability organisation. And that's great for the individual. The individual, is now employed. And we talk about, safety and respect and equity and all those things. Like financial security is the basis of safety. And so we need that. And so yes, that benefits the individual, and that's incredible first steps. What we're not seeing is people with disabilities employed in very visible roles. And I remember taking my dog to the vet maybe 2 years ago, and it was the first time I had seen somebody in a wheelchair at a workplace that wasn't disability centric. I remember taking him in and being shocked, and then being so embarrassed that myself as a woman with a disability was shocked to see another person in a chair in that role. And so that's what we're not seeing. And I remember growing up and all my friends through high school beginning to get, their casual jobs in retail, grocery stores, those kinds of things. And I remember thinking, what would I do if I needed to do this? And I'd already started my career as an athlete, so thankfully that wasn't something that I ever had to, battle through personally. But there was nothing, I wasn't seeing anything. And, when you looked at working in a grocery store, you were thinking, stacking shelves isn't actually feasible while I'm sitting in a chair. The actual checkout isn't an accessible space for a person that looks like me. And so you begin to gatekeep the workforce, you gatekeep employment. And so when all of our value is placed in our ability to earn, and so many of us, our identity is in what we do as a job, we're not actually allowing that for 20% of our population. And it's shocking when you actually think about it. But we don't actually expect, people with disabilities to work. And us is the 20%. We then grow up not believing that that is the space that we will take up. But the 80% also doesn't push us to do that. And we're so defined by the environments that we find ourselves in. And we're not being encouraged from every angle and expected to grow in that space. Then how are we going to actually expect to set those goals and to find that as end result? And when we talk about higher level jobs that require tertiary education, the idea of I'm studying at the moment as well, and it's a challenging thing trying to juggle everything and uni. It's hard for every single person. But if you can't see what that end goal is, if you've never seen someone that looks like you in the job that you are working and sacrificing to be able to get to, why put yourself through those 4 years to actually end up in that space? And so that's one of the things that we're trying to change right now. And it's the first step. And we look at the women's movement and everything that is done, and then look at the disability movement, and it's the same conversation. We're having the exact same conversation years behind. And so one of the things that is so important to me is the intersectionality, that the women's movement, which is the biggest of all of them at the moment, brings everything else with it. And we're starting to see more of that intersection at the moment in a lot of the conversations that I'm having, which is incredible. But that's kind of the different levels that we're at. And I think we need to kind of look at that in quite a broader picture.
Yeah, and I think it's so important, and it's a perspective that's often overlooked, or if you don't have a lived experience or a connection, access to any employment is still a barrier for people with disability, let alone access to boardrooms and executive roles, even though, again, we understand and support that those avenues and those journeys still need to be had. So Claire, I'll bring you in at this point. I guess this is your opportunity to talk about if you had a Mary Poppins moment and you could just click your fingers and yes, all the washing would be done, but you could also change something that could make the world more equitable for women. There is so much to change in so many different avenues. What would it be for you that you would like
For me, it would
fixing
be-
or focus on?
It would be that we just see the person and not the gender or the religion or the culture or what someone looks like or how they present, but just to understand that the skills and the qualities that they bring, whether that be to a social group or a workplace or wherever it might be, that they be valued and they be assessed and accepted for what they are.
Based on what they are and who they are, not necessarily what they identify
Yeah, that's
or as
right.
other people identify them as.
And I think if we did that, we'd see women naturally in all different roles. We'd see them, peppered throughout, from the C-suite right through, because we're looking at the person and what they bring to that space and that environment and that role, rather than, we've got a quota, we need to have 5% Indigenous, we need to have 5% female, whatever it might be. Quotas are great, don't get me wrong, but they come with a lot of complexity. But if we just looked at the person and the skills we needed for that job, we'd probably find that we're naturally engaging more diversity.
And Carolyn, at a CEO level, obviously, you have an enormous role to play for the next generation of women who aspire to leadership roles. What sort of, role do you have to play to ensure that, to Madison's point, that we don't forget that there are barriers at the entry level, let alone to where you're at?
I think for me it's about having and very much valuing the empathy and understanding what, trying to get that connection and that understanding of what people feel and are experiencing, or what some of those barriers may be, and then helping guide and empower and enable those barriers to be addressed or undertaken. I really love watching the journey of people come through the systems, and but being empathetic and understanding that, seeking first to understand, is just such a key. Again, to Claire's point, it doesn't matter what you look like or what you do. It should just be understanding that first part about what you can bring to the role or the process or the where you may end up.
Wonderful. And I think, and I don't know, I look at this room, and often International Women's Day events don't look like this room, and I choose not to partake in those events where there isn't intersectionality, where there isn't diversity of lived experience, because it's really easy to surround yourself with people who have similar life experiences, who have similar social circles. So I guess this is just a moment to thank the organisers and thank all the women in this room for actually coming to the table and engaging with people who may not be the same as us, because in fighting gender bias, I think it's problematic when we take on other sorts of bias and that we only deal with or replicate the experiences of women like ourselves. We're going to have a chat for about another 10 minutes before we turn to questions, and this is another invitation for anyone who's joining us from social media to please send through your questions, and I'll do my best to get to them. For the first 20 minutes, we've discussed what it is we feel and we would like as women, which is an essential and pivotal part of today. But for change to happen, we need the males in our lives to be, to be allies. And I acknowledge the one gentleman who joined us today. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. And so this is where I want to talk about how it is we can enlist the people in our personal and professional lives to drive this change, because we're stronger together. So I'll stay with you, Carolyn. There are no doubt many men who want to help be part of the solution. How can they, in your experience, be better allies and amplify women in, both women in sport and women in the corporate world?
I think what you see more and more of is the males actually picturing themselves as to the support mechanism about, I think a lot of them obviously have a lot of females in their life, so they often interchange the person in the corporate role with supporting as they would perhaps a family member. And I think there's been a very genuine change into the way people parent and father and uncle, all of those things come into play now. There's certainly, I'm older than some in the room, but there's certainly you can see a distinct change in the way that interaction happens in society, which hopefully will stream through to the the corporate, the business, the sporting world, whatever, you know, that looks like. So I think that is a change that has occurred. Has it happened quick enough? Has it happened enough? I won't go into that now, but I think that's one of the ways. And also it gets back to my very first point about hinging on that performance or that achievement or whatever that may actually bring someone up to be in the spotlight to start with, that they can then take that forward. So celebrating the wins, celebrating achievements, as small or as big as they may be, medals or whatever it might be, but just the fact that
green ribbons,
green ribbons,
green
happy to
participation
celebrate
ribbons.
that. It's seriously, I think, about those steps to take in regards to that.
And Wendy, do you ever fear or wonder, I guess, if men are being left out of the conversation of this change? Or, you know, do you have any sort of pragmatic and practical ways where you think men can be involved and empowered?
I think it's just you know, being around the examples of which women are today. My husband now loves hiring mothers who, you know, want to get back into the workforce, because he's realised, you know, he's got quite a large business, and he's realised that time is of the essence to them, of course, and they work harder than anyone. And so I think through myself and through my peers and my friends, he's realised that there is so much talent out there, and there are so many women who were out of the workforce for a while, having children, wanting to enter, and realising that that's something that is actually a massive opportunity for business, and has seen a lot of change in his business, in fact, as a result of that. So, you know, my father, you know, I grew up in quite a conservative family. Marriage was always, you know, if not the first priority, one of the priorities, but alongside that was education. And I always was pushing more on the education side. I was always, you know, I got married after my sisters. I was the eldest of all my cousins to get married. Nobody ever thought I'd have children, and I'm the one with the most kids. And, you know, so it's just, it's you know, it's crazy how life works. But I think having men on your side is something. Having every man on your side would be wonderful. But we need to have each other's backs as well, and we need to increase the odds for each other. And I think
as women?
As women, yeah. I think that, you know, when another woman wins, she's increased the odds, not for you, but also for your peers, for your children, for everyone that you know. And recognising that and celebrating that is really important. And then allowing men also to realise that obviously it's worth celebrating. And you know, giving people the chance and giving people opportunities is everything, but we need to seek them out for ourselves as well. And that's what I've had to do through my career. And I still get comments all the time. You know, if you ever see me in a shopping centre and my kids are, you know, I've got 5 under 8. So, you know, I am one of those with the trolley and the kids inside and all of that. And, you know, I often worry that people will just go, oh, you know, she's not going to be able to do this anymore. She's got 5 kids. And in fact, it actually motivates me to do it even more, because I have to do it for the woman next to me who wants to have children and keep her career, you know, and I have to do it for women who look like me as well and have backgrounds like me. So we fight for each other. We have to celebrate each other's wins, and we have to invite the men to the party.
Wonderful. Claire, do you have anything to add here, both in a professional context, but also, you know, in your personal life, in terms of bringing men and the next generation of men along the journey?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, we talk about men doing the wrong thing. There's lots of great men out there. There's lots of great men. You know, my dad's a great man, my husband's a great man. There's great men around us, but we also have to take some accountability for this. So if we see a man speaking poorly to a lady, or we see something that's not appropriate, we need to muscle up and we need to say something. So it's a two-way street. You know, in doing that, we educate men, and we're teaching people how to treat us, basically. And we need to make sure that we're accountable for that. But I think at a different level, and particularly for me personally, I have 2 little boys, you know, 2 and 5, and I have to make sure that I'm really consciously teaching them that you're not better than anyone else. You're not more important than anyone else, particularly because you're a boy. And even just this week, my 5-year-old came home and said, oh, you know, he started swimming lessons, and he said, oh, as a little girl, I'm way faster than her in the pool. And I said, well, you know, if she practices a lot, she's going to whip you, so you better start practicing, you know. So it's just this idea that just because you're a boy, you're faster or stronger. That is coming through outside of my home. That's not coming from me. So I have to be conscious that I'm really educating proactively to say, girls can do just as much as you can, and also to celebrate and embrace all the things that are different about women and girls. You know, there's great stuff. Men and women are different. It's not bad. We just need to make sure we harness that and nurture it and pull it up if it's inappropriate.
And Madison, any thoughts here on, I guess, the importance of men being allies, but also how you counter any resistance? I'm sure probably most of us in the room have like, oh, is there an International Men's Day? And why do you get special treatment? It's like, well, would you like a walk in our uncomfortable shoes? It's not special treatment. So both the importance of allies and any tips, and also how you counter any resistance to, special treatment.
When it comes to how we need men to be allies in the spaces that we need men to take up, it's about recognizing the privileged lens that they're able to view the world through. Because privilege exists in every single space, and all of us are a combination of varying levels of it. And I think as women, when we do, one of the things we all have in common is that we do all belong to that minority, we belong to an underprivileged group. We're able to see where we do also hold it. And I find that's one of the most beautiful things about women leaders that we have, is recognizing where they're underprivileged and where they actually hold more, and where they are therefore responsible to use their platform in a way that brings others with them. And that's one of the things that I'm seeing in sport at the moment a lot, around very successful women athletes using their platform to create a landscape that's so encompassing that we're not going to have to be having this fight, hopefully, in the next couple of generations. And that's something that I love, and I'm so proud of these women for doing that so consistently across the board. It's not something that I see in men, and I don't think you've necessarily had to take the time to recognize it. And I think we all want to believe that we're working as hard as the next person. I think that's something that as humans we need to. We take great pride in everything we've achieved, and I understand that. I think we all do. I'm very proud of everything that I have achieved, and that's something that's so important to us as humans and as people. And so I think to step outside of that, to recognize where somebody lacks privilege, you truly need to recognize where you hold it. And that's a very confronting conversation to have. And it's one that a lot of people haven't had to have had. Whereas, I think everyone in this room, we've had that to varying levels. And so that's something that I think a lot of men, if they were to take the time to do, the empathy that would come from that and the understanding we would have, not just for women, but the intersectionality would be enormous. And we talk about systems that are designed, we're not saying systems that are designed by men that don't benefit. It's a specific kind of man. And it's, the straight, white, able-bodied, cis man. And the further you are from that, the less designed for you it is. So the systems that we have right now, it's not just, women that it doesn't benefit. It's a whole spectrum of men as well. And so when we talk about this movement, it's the feminist movement. I know a lot of men do shy away from it, but it's something that actually benefits every single human. If we're designing systems that encompass everybody in their authenticity and in their power, it doesn't just benefit women, it benefits men. And we need men to lead that, because they're the ones that are, occupying those high level decision making roles. And it's important that we're having this conversation together. Otherwise, we're having to wait for generational change. We're waiting for mothers now to raise their boys in a way that we can have this conversation in a generation, rather than having it right now. And so that would be my thing, is recognize the privilege you hold and how you can use that platform to actually impact enormous change.
Wonderful. On that note, I will open up to questions and compliments, or both, from the audience. If anybody, I guess you can just raise your hand, ask anything. Surely there's something for our wonderful panellists. Nobody has anything to ask? Yeah, wonderful. Let's go.
Thank you. Just firstly, I actually have a million questions. I feel like I need another 2 hours listening to you ladies speak, so thank you so much. But I'll put you on the spot. If you had to give one piece of advice to your 15-year-old selves, or to your young children, or to your siblings, or to whoever, what would it be around breaking that ice that you've just spoken so eloquently about?
I would tell my younger self that you need to take the time to work out exactly who you are and make every decision based on that and your values, because we're so inundated with what we should be and how we should, what we should believe and how we should act. And And again, as women, that's a very rigid structure that we're all, we're raised in a very specific way, and we all know what it is. I don't need to go into that, but we don't. And I found this through sport, because the role you have to play as an athlete is very masculine. It's competitive, it's fiery, it's aggressive, and I'm not those things. And I nearly stepped away from the sport after the London Paralympics when I was 18, because I didn't think I had what it took to be the athlete that I wanted to be, because I didn't have the temperament that I thought was required. And I was being told that by everybody around me. And it took strong women in my life pulling me to the side and working out who I was as a person, and therefore who I am as an athlete. And we changed our entire approach to sport in that way. Like, I didn't go into a race to win. We set, smaller goals in that race, and if I can execute them perfectly, I'm putting myself in the best possible position to be the best in the world on that day. And that's something that I wouldn't have done outside of, if I didn't think that I was retiring from my first career at 18.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that we as girls don't do. We don't work out who we are. We just believe everything that we're told. We see it everywhere. But if we take the time to work out what is actually authentic to us, that the power in that is enormous. And when things do get very challenging, and obviously myself as an athlete that is in sport, but every single one of us has points where you have to make sacrifices, where it is overwhelming and walking away feels like the easiest thing. Somebody else's reasons are never going to be enough in those moments, but yours will be. And if you've done the work to work out what those reasons are, the power in that is huge. And that would be the only piece of advice I think I would give a younger person.
I'll go next. Advice to 15-year-old me: don't overpluck your eyebrows, because you're going to spend a lot of time and money on feathering. No, but seriously, I would also say that lean into what's different about you. I've realised that coming into what was unique and nerdy and out of place about me has actually been my greatest credit. It's been my greatest strength, and it's being comfortable with being different. That took a little while for me to really embrace, and that's what I would tell 15-year-old me. Do you have any advice for young you?
I think mine would be seek first, understand. I was very quick to react to all sorts of things, and I think as I've aged, I've become, I hope, better at that, and I think that helps put the whole thing in perspective, so then you can see sort of two sides to things rather than just the one and react to it, because in that naturally competitive space you find yourself, sometimes you wish you had perhaps just taken a moment rather than jumped in there. So for that would be for me. Yeah.
I think there was another question. And let me know if it's for anyone in particular or just open. Yeah.
Well, I just want to echo the comments earlier to say thank you so much for your very interesting insights. I'm learning a lot. My question is more so, I guess as a campaigner, I always do like to ask people sort of their call to action, and so I am interested in, earlier you articulated what this means to you and sort of your vision for what it looks like, but what are some sort of tangible steps that you encourage people to take, be it through politics or sports or whatever, any other avenue that you think is important? What is your call to action that you want to bring? And I would like to open that up.
Yeah, maybe Wendy, with you, if you were to, what you're really passionate about, if it was to become a viral campaign, what would it be?
There's been a few of them.
Yeah.
Look, I think you need to use your voice, and it's the power of the people. So, during lockdown campaigning on the wedding side of things for the small business owners, we ran a whole series of petitions, 10,000 signatures at a time within, 48 hours. We had over, in the thousands of letters written to local politicians. We actually wrote the letters on behalf of the business, on behalf of the consumer. We uploaded that to our website, and we actually then encouraged everyone to send it off. We provided very clear links to do that. We also, I got behind quite a number of petitions that I wasn't running personally. One was when the IVF was paused in Victoria, and that really struck a chord with me. And it became a bit of a scenario where I thought to myself, this decision has not been made by women. There was not a single woman in the room when this decision was made. And so that was definitely a petition that I was behind driving. Petitions work. Using your social media platform and actually getting a few people behind your cause works. Organising events works. Writing letters and actually having a goal and a target set for what you want to achieve, and getting, again, people behind that works. And I don't like to use the term making noise, because it isn't noise. It's actually really fruitful, very productive energy that's being pulled together for a common cause and for the objective, and the eyes on the prize at the end of the day. And I called, the things that I did, I called local MPs. I was on the radio very publicly with Gladys Berejiklian at one point. I was on the phone with ministers. I got everyone's phone number that I needed to get what I needed to get done. And you just, when you have a cause and when there's a will, there's definitely a way, but you do need people around you, and you do need to get media attention in this country, and particularly mainstream media, which is incredibly challenging. But if you have the right angle and approach, as we know, I've had many articles run through news.com and Daily Mail and all those kinds of things. It is all about you knowing what you want to achieve, knowing also what the reader wants to consume, and then finding somewhere a common balance between that. We see, and this is something that, we're seeing what's happening in Ukraine at the moment, Palestine and the comparisons. And we had, Gigi Hadid put up a post saying, I've just walked, for Fashion Week. My money's going to both because it's a common cause and there's a common thread here. So when you see models and advocates and influencers actually, and not just do it once, you can never just do something once, okay? Because that, to me, is just like, trying to hit the target on the head first go with no rhyme or reason as to why you're doing it. You have to be consistent behind a cause, and you definitely have to rally people behind you. You have to inspire people to want to get behind you as well, because you can make a difference in that way.
And do you have any tips? What would be your campaign or call to action?
Yeah, for me, I'm really passionate about children. I specialise in child and adolescent welfare, and they're really my greatest passion. So I always work in spaces where I'm championing them in some capacity. And I see my role as a CEO as an advocate. Whatever the mission of that organisation, it's my role to raise that and to raise awareness for what's happening and where the deficits are. And for me, I have to find some comfort in it. Doesn't always look how we think it's going to look. Early in my career, I always sent the email, or I made the call, or I waited my turn. And now I just take that space. And, I saw Barnaby Joyce's plane parked, and I waited for an hour. And when he came out airside, I ran like a maniac. And I said, Barnaby, I need some time with you. Obviously it was not...
Did he give you some time?
He gave me 2 minutes. He did not want me to walk into his plane, but he's coming to our launch this week.
Yeah, great. Well done.
It doesn't always look how you think it's going to look when you're advocate. Sometimes it's ugly, sometimes it's messy, sometimes there's a lot of judgment around how you do it. But I think at the end of the day, you have to find your own comfort and really be clear on why you're doing it. Intention is such an important part of why we get up every day and what we say and what we do. So, I'm a girl that begs for forgiveness and doesn't ask for permission. And I feel I spend my whole life apologising, but at the end of the day, my intentions are all good, and they're all with the purpose to raise the voice of children that maybe aren't in a position to do that, or their families.
The one thing I would add to that is, it's important to find your niche and find your voice, and it may be different. Like, not everybody is going to run up to Barnaby Joyce or have a big online presence and send letters to MPs. And that may be off-putting for some people who think, oh, I'm a little more introverted, I don't like social media, I don't even like public speaking. And so I think it's important to not be put off by that and go, oh, but I'm just a mum, or I'm just a small business owner, and to find something within your world that you can harness and seek to influence. And it doesn't have to be, oh, I'm going to be the person that puts the end to the incarceration of Indigenous women, or I'm going to be the person who, puts the end to the, domestic violence against women. It can be at a much smaller scale, and it can be more immediate, and it can be in a way that cultivates your world and your comfort levels. Because I think we all have a role to play. We're not all going to be Olympic gold Olympic winners, and we're not all going to rush onto, or almost break into a parliamentarian's plane, and that's okay, because there's a role for all of us. And to be a change maker, I think you find your own path and your own voice, and you don't need to emulate somebody else. And I guess that's the thing I would impart, because if we really are leaning into our difference, then we should lean into the fact that we have different worlds, we have different characters, and we all wield some sort of power, even if it's the power on your local P&C committee, or if it's the power within your family dynamic, or the power as a mother raising the next generation of men. Yeah, so that would be my, but yes.
So we've got 2 questions on social media.
Great.
There we go. Okay, microphones. So one of them is actually for Wendy, which is from Lily Co Customs. She did ask, we talk about how we need to adapt to bring men on the journey, but how do we tackle the reverse? Men who believe they are with us, but when it gets tough, aren't flexible.
It's a great question.
People don't like to be out of their comfort zones, you know, and this is just a blanket rule, and especially men. And, you know, my career started as a project manager at the Commonwealth Bank. I was on a floor. I was 21 years old. I was probably one of the youngest people amongst thousands. And many of everyone actually that I reported to was male. And there were so many mistakes that I made and so many things that I didn't realize, but what I did know was that I was very good at my job, and that I was going to be there and do my job no matter what. And I was going to do it my way. And a lot of that time, you know, and through that, I had people say, oh no, you walk into a room and you're bouncing off the walls, you've got so many ideas. You're at the bank, it's very conservative here. You need to, you need to calm down. You're not, I would wear what someone else was wearing, but on me it was different, and my hair was always too big. I had big curly hair, and I always was kind of a little bit outside of, I guess, what was expected, but it didn't stop me. In fact, that's what I took on as my armor, and went, okay, well, I look different and I sound different, but it's okay. I'm still going to do my job at the best of my ability, and I'm going to make them listen to me, and make them understand that this is my approach, and do it so well that someone's going to pay attention and take notice and move on and move on and move on. And that's what I did. And unfortunately, it shouldn't feel like a fight. We shouldn't have to feel like we have to use all of our energy to combat something else, as opposed to all of our energy to actually just do our job, right? But you are...
So in that scenario, I'm just going to jump in. You navigated that by being bigger and better.
Yes.
And just kind of leaning into who you were. But I just want to question, is that fair, though, that we've got to be perfect little 21-year-olds, by the way?
Yeah.
Because there'd be some dude called Daryl who's crap at his job and he got promoted, right?
Yeah,
He's
but
got terrible
I needed
dress
to...
sense.
So for me, my background's actually education, and I believe that, knowing is doing. And so I had to learn, and it wasn't just me bouncing around. I needed to know everything that I needed to know to do my job perfectly, because I'm a perfectionist. It wasn't for anyone else, but it was so I could move forward in a really positive manner and be confident that what I'm doing is the right thing. And that's what I did. I did so much research, I still till now, and my little piece of advice to any 15-year-old out there would be, you need to understand the way that the world works, because the decisions that are made in a room are a reflection of every single person's background and every single person's identity, and what their mother told them or what their brother told them, and all of these different things. And so if you can influence that room, you can influence the world. And so you need to recognize that when somebody says no, why are they saying no? And ask the question. I asked for meetings that I probably was not entitled or allowed to. And sometimes I was like, hey, I'm over here. I need to meet with you. I need to speak to you. How can I do this better? How can I improve? I want this job. What do I need to do to get there? And give me a reason why not, And so that's essentially what I did, because I wanted to be the best at my job, but also it was very challenging to fight. And I don't want the future generations to have to fight. I just want them to win.
Very good.
Amazing response. And the second question by the same user was, how do you feel about women still getting treated differently in the corporate world because they're pregnant?
Well, that's fun.
Who would you like to take that one? Have you had much experience with that?
Yes, that's always a tricky one. Actually, in my first CEO role, I was pregnant with my first baby, and I didn't slow down. I was still wearing the heels. I was still in the dresses. I worked right up until a week before I had my baby, and I came back 2 weeks after I had him. Not a smart move. And I thought I could do it all. And when I started to burn out and I spoke to the board about it, they just turned around and said to me, if you're a man, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So make it work. So look, these are real conversations that are happening in a boardroom. These are really tough decisions. I was just too tired to fight at that point, and so I just went on as long as I could, and then I resigned. But if I had my time again, I think what I'd be doing is preparing my toolkit on how I want it to look like, and the things that I need to say if I am confronted with those things. These days I'm much better armed if someone comes at me like that, but at that time I'd really never experienced much bias, and I was really slapped in the face with it at that point in time. Look, it's a journey. It's probably the only thing that once you've started, you can't get out of. You know, you're pregnant, you've got to have the baby, you're going to get bigger, it's going to become more obvious. And whilst we want to do it all, I think we need to be mindful that we may not be able to do it all. And if we
At once. That's my motto.
Or well,
Yeah.
you know, so just to know your limits and to be armed with a response if and when it comes. And it's a shame that we have to feel that way and we have to be armed with it. But I find it comes out of nowhere when you least expect it, and usually when you're most vulnerable. So it's still an issue, but one I hope we're working through.
The only thing I would add to that, and very well answered, and it is a journey, and it's, I think, getting better in many workplaces, but there are still problems. Having a mentor can be really helpful. Having somebody when you are sleep deprived and navigating it all, somebody to talk to and provide advice. I think that can be really helpful to navigate those spaces. We may take one last question from the room. Yeah.
One for the comment actually. And firstly, before I say anything, I wanted to just say thank you to all of you remarkable women who are role models for all of us, not only here in the room, but in general. So thank you. But just going back to the break the bias piece, but I think one thing on observation from my perspective and my experience so far to date is we really need to see more male representation really championing these conversations that we're having. So for example, in the room today we have Mark here. So Mark, thank you for putting this on and being here. But what would be great is to see some more males present and actually listening in on these conversations and championing what we're actually trying to do here. And I say that with respect in general across the board, and especially in corporate these days. I think that's where we'll really start to see, you know, those biases being challenged. Because currently we're having, you know, this such a great conversation around what we've been through and what we're experiencing and how we're going to fight to change that and to sort of challenge that. But yeah, seeing the men here doing that as well will be great. And that's how I see us breaking down those barriers even further.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so just again, comment.
Thank you so much for that comment, and for all of you for being here today. To our amazing panellists, a huge round of applause. Thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, for navigating the weather, for sharing your passion, your pain and your journeys. It's absolutely, you know, it's essential that we continue having these conversations. I believe there's going to be some dessert and a bit more networking and mingling and some photo ops and an opportunity to swap. I don't know if anyone has business cards anymore, but Instagram handles and LinkedIn pages. We're stronger together. And it's an absolute privilege being your host today. So thank you so much. Let's enjoy the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you.